What makes the poles so different? In this week's episode, we'll explore how these icy worlds differ in geography, wildlife, climate, and human presence. We'll also look at useful vocabulary and expressions to help you talk confidently about polar regions in English, whether you're just chatting with a friend or taking an English exam. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, my name's Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with nearly 60 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. Well, thank you all for listening. You're especially welcome if you're a new listener. Thanks very much. Craig, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm quite busy, as I think you are as well. It's a busy time of year for teachers like us, but I'm very happy to be podcasting again with you this week and speaking about a little bit of geography. Thanks to friend of the show, Carmen from Malaga, who recently sent us an email. What did she say, Reza?
I'll read out Carmen's email. I really enjoyed your episode about Australia.
Australia,
that was episode 608. So put inglespodcast.com/608 into your search and you'll get that episode. She continues, and I was wondering if you'd like to record one about the differences between Antarctica and the North Pole.
Well, yes, we would, Carmen. We would like to, and we're going to. So thank you very much once again for your excellent suggestions. Now, the North Pole and the South Pole, they are possibly, well, definitely, I think, two of the most extreme places on Earth. They are frozen, full of ice, very remote from civilization, from where people live, and full of fascinating contrasts.
Yes, and there's an expression, poles apart. And of course, Antarctica and the Arctic are literally poles apart. One is the North Pole and one is the South Pole. And the expression to be poles apart means, idiomatically, to be completely different from each other. For example, a podcast like ours, Aprender Inglés with Rez and Craig, compared to a podcast about the latest rap music, are poles apart. They couldn't be more different. I'm afraid Craig and I can't tell you much about rap music, but we can tell you a lot about learning English. So those two podcasts would be poles apart, completely different from each other.
And I just thought of another example. My sister and I get on very well. We're quite close, but we are poles apart in personality. We are very different people. We're not similar at all. We are poles apart. So let's start the podcast talking about these two different poles with a polar quiz. Now, polar is the adjective, so the polar quiz is describing the quiz. It's a quiz about the poles. You can also have similar collocations. You can talk about the polar wind, for example. Polar bear, obviously, is a kind or a type of bear. And there are some questions here that we're going to ask you about the North Pole and the South Pole. What's the first one, Reza?
Question 1. Do penguins live at the North Pole, the Arctic, or the South Pole, Antarctica?
That's a really good question.
That's a very good question. Let's give listeners time to think about that. Penguins, where are they? Let's say the South Pole. Is that right?
That is correct. Penguins live only at the South Pole. They don't live in the North Pole.
Okay, here's one for you, Reza. Which pole is located on a continent? There are 7 continents, aren't there? And one of the poles is a continent. Is it the North Pole or the South Pole?
That's a really good question.
Did you get that, listeners? I knew that one already. The South Pole, Antarctica, is a continent. The North Pole is not considered a continent.
The next question, 3, is a true or false question. Let's see if you know this. Polar bears live in Antarctica. Is that true or false?
That's a really good question.
What do you think, Reza?
I would say both. Am I right?
No,
I
they live in the Arctic, in the North Pole. Do you have a system for remembering which pole is which, like which is the Arctic and which is the Antarctic?
kind of, yes.
How do you remember it?
Well, when I was a kid, I needed to think this way, but now I've just got it, off by heart. Start at the north. Yeah. Whenever we talk about the points of the compass, we often say north, south, west, east, or east, west. But north, we often say first, right? Going north. North's the way to go. So north first. So north is the short one, Arctic. The basic one, Arctic. And then you add to that. So Antarctic, then that's south. So that's my way of remembering it. The short one, the basic one, Arctic, north.
That's interesting. I have a different but similar, similar but different way of remembering it, because Arctic is a shorter word than Antarctic. So usually when you're writing, it looks much nicer to have the shorter word at the top and the longer word at the bottom. Aesthetically, it just looks nicer. So if I put Arctic at the top and then Antarctic under Arctic, that reminds me that Arctic is at the top, north, and Antarctica is at the bottom, the longer word. Question number 4. The North Pole is found in the middle of which ocean?
That's a really good question.
What's your answer?
Well, that's an easy one for me because I love questions about geography and maps. Obviously, I would say in the Arctic Ocean.
And you would be correct. Well done. The Arctic Ocean. And well done if you got that listening at home.
What about this one? Number 5. Which pole is generally colder?
That's a really good question.
Well, I would say it's probably the North Pole, because north is usually colder than south, isn't it? If you're Northern Europe's colder than Southern Europe, is that right?
That's true, and many people think, oh, north is colder. But actually, in the case of the poles, it's the opposite. The South Pole is colder.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow. Okay, I've learned something. Question number 6. Are there any permanent human residents at the South Pole? Do people live at the South Pole?
That's a really good question.
I would say no, it's too cold.
You are absolutely correct. Only temporary scientific staff live there. People doing research, people who are temporarily there for scientific reasons, they are there, but there are no permanent settlements at the South Pole.
I mean, who would want to live there? I don't know if it's even possible, but you would have to have a strange mindset if you wanted to live in the South Pole.
Well, people live very close to the North Pole, and although it's a little bit warmer, it's still not that warm there, so we'll talk more about that later. The final question, question number 7. Which animals are commonly found in the Arctic? Seals, reindeer, or both?
That's a really good question.
I'm going to go for both.
And you would be right. Both reindeers and seals can be found in the Arctic. Let's take a quick break here, because I know you listen to this podcast to take your English to the next level. But what about your speaking? Is your fluency improving? Are you happy with your speaking skills? My conversation course focuses on making you a more confident and more fluent English speaker. You'll join me and a small group of motivated students, and we'll meet on Zoom and have topical discussions, role plays, debates, and presentations that will expand your vocabulary and help you express yourself effectively in English. So be proactive and take the first step towards becoming a confident and fluent English speaker. Send me an email today to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you details of the next online conversation course. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the podcast. Okay, let's look at a few more details looking at the areas of geography, climate, wildlife, and humans who live there. Let's start with geography, Reza. Tell us some facts, some geographical facts about the poles.
So, as we mentioned earlier, the North Pole is located in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. It's covered by drifting sea ice, whereas the South Pole is located on the continent of Antarctica. So remember, Antarctica is a continent, whereas the North Pole isn't. The North Pole is just ice. But the South Pole, Antarctica, it sits on a massive landmass. There's land under the ice. So there's really, really thick sheets of ice, but under that ice, there is land, but only in the South Pole.
So two things there, Reza. Can you explain what drifting means, drifting sea ice, and also ice sheet?
Yeah, so the North Pole is, it drifts in the sea. So the North Pole is not always exactly in the same place because it isn't land. It's ice. So it's pretty solid ice, you know. It's not going to melt anytime soon, but it might eventually, particularly if we keep burning oil at the rate we do, it might well happen. But for now, it's not. But it does drift. It moves around according to where the sea takes it. Because remember, the Arctic is surrounded by ocean, whereas the Antarctica is a continent and it's got the ocean around it.
And what does ice sheet mean? What's an ice sheet?
Oh.
I know what a sheet of paper is.
Right. Yep. Of course. So a sheet means a large, thin, or perhaps slightly thick in this case, area of something. So the ice sheets of the South Pole, we're talking about many kilometers. Yeah. And thick, wow, they could be meters, kilometers thick as well. So there is land under those sheets, but you might have to first go through about 5,000 sheets of thick ice before you get to the land. But it's there under all the sheets, under the layers, you could say.
And make sure you're making that long E sound with the word sheets, like the sheet on your bed, because if you make it a short sound, you get shit. And we don't want that, do we, Reza?
No, that would be quite a mistake.
Moving on to climate, the North Pole is slightly warmer. I mean, it's still cold at the North Pole, but it's a little bit warmer because the sea ice moderates the temperature, whereas the South Pole, Antarctica, that's the coldest place on Earth. And temperatures can reach as low as -60 or -70 degrees centigrade. So incredibly cold at the South Pole.
Craig, what's the coldest environment you've ever been in?
I can remember back when I was a young lad, a young boy of 17, 18 years old, waiting at the bus stop where I grew up in the UK with a very, very heavy sheepskin coat on that was incredibly warm, and standing at the bus stop with wind and rain and extremely cold weather in the UK. And I remember feeling I have never been as cold as this before, even with a very warm coat. And I was standing there for about 20 minutes, half an hour waiting for a bus. So that comes to mind. What about you?
I've been at -80 degrees and with no clothes on.
In a freezer?
Yep, more or less, yep.
Why were you naked?
I wasn't completely naked, I must say, to avoid frostbite, and particularly in certain areas. But I did have my underwear on, and I also had a pair of socks on and a pair of gloves, and something covering my ears. but the rest of me was naked, and I did this voluntarily. In fact, I paid to do it. It's
Whatever turns you on.
or whatever turns you off. In this case, it could kill you. It's called cryotherapy. I got into what you might call a kind of cabinet, a bit like going to one of those sunbathing cabinets. But instead of ultraviolet light, it's extreme cold. But of course, you're only there for about 3 minutes. And literally, if you stayed there about 6 or 7, you'd probably die. But for 2 or 3 minutes, you're okay. And you get in and it is bloody cold, yeah. But you get out feeling incredibly refreshed and just very, very happy to be alive.
So what's the feeling? Do you feel like a tingling where your body feels alive, or how did you feel when you came out?
Yeah, a tingling, and you feel extremely cold. But when you get out, you're really, really, really cold. The sweet spot, the best moment is about 15 minutes later. So you put something warm over you, like some kind of dressing gown or something, and you wait for about 10 minutes. Then you begin to warm up, and it's at that time when you feel a really, really, really great sense of vigor. You feel really alive, and you feel really good. And the reason I did it is because I suffer from arthritis in some joints, and it helps with that because cold reduces inflammation. I did it for that reason. A lot of top athletes do it regularly.
Did it help your arthritis?
It does temporarily. It's not a permanent fix, but it does temporarily bring down inflammation because, please listeners, don't think about me too much when I tell you this, but everything, and I do mean everything, shrinks when you're at extreme cold. So the inflammation goes down. I told you not to think too much about it, didn't I?
Unbelievable. I think we should move on to wildlife. Now, in the Arctic, as we mentioned in the quiz, you can find polar bears, those lovely big white bears that wander the ice in search of food. You can also see Arctic foxes, which are white foxes that roam the ice. To roam is to wander and walk around, again, looking for food. Walruses and seals, reindeer, and of course, whales in the sea. All of those animals you can find at the Arctic.
As we said earlier, penguins, on the other hand, are in the Antarctic. Also, you can find seals and whales and seabirds in the Antarctic. But you can't find penguins in the North Pole, only in Antarctica.
So try to remember that. Reindeer and seals, both. Polar bears north and penguins south. What about human presence, Reza? Human beings?
Well, even though it is incredibly cold, there is a permanent presence of humans in the Arctic. There are indigenous communities. That means the original people who've always lived there. For example, you've got the Inuit, or you've got the Sami, and a few other groups of people. And there are even a few small towns. And also, there are quite a lot of research stations where scientists doing various things live part of the year, and even a few all year round.
And in Antarctica, there are no permanent residents, only scientists and support staff, as we mentioned before. Looking at vocabulary and collocations around this part of the world, if you need to talk about this area in an English exam or with friends or whatever. We mentioned the ice sheet before, which is a long covering of ice that covers a wide area. There's also different kinds of ice, as you might expect. There's something called sea ice, which is just frozen sea. And there's something called pack ice, P-A-C-K. You know, when you pack a suitcase and you have to put everything in a very tight space, well, think of ice coming together, maybe different fragments or pieces of sea ice blown together in one place, or brought together by wind or by the currents, the movement in the sea. And this is kind of packed together and pushed together, and that's called pack ice.
Ice shelf is also a common expression. Now, I'm not sure 100% technically what it means, but for me, it's the idea of a very, very, very large piece of ice, but it does have a limit to it. And so at the edge of the ice shelf, there will be what looks like a big cliff into the sea. So an ice shelf could be 1 kilometer square, but it could be 20 kilometers square. Some are bigger, some are smaller. So it's a very large piece of ice. And my understanding of it is that it floats in the sea. Is that right?
Well, it can be attached to land. It can float and it can be attached to land, or it can be attached to our next word, which is glacier. So a glacier is a slow-moving river of ice that gradually moves down into the sea or into the area that's frozen sea. So ice shelf can be attached to land itself, and it can also be attached to a glacier.
Permafrost is another common expression. Permafrost is, for example, the ice that you find on top of the land in Antarctica. We said that there is land in the South Pole. It's a continent, quite a big one, actually. And on top of the land, you've got ice. And that ice never melts. Some of it has been there for tens of hundreds of thousands of years, and it hasn't melted. It's permanent. So it's permafrost.
And I think in order to be permafrost, the ground has to be frozen for at least 2 years, and then you can call it permafrost and permanent. Tundra is found commonly in the Arctic, and it's vegetation that grows very, very low because of the conditions in this part of the world. Obviously, there isn't a lot of sun very often and not a lot of sun warmth, so it can't grow very high. So tundra is very low vegetation that you often see in this part of the world.
A very useful collocation to talk about both poles is sub-zero temperatures. Sub-zero means below zero. You can also say below zero, sub-zero or below zero temperatures.
It's very difficult to live in the poles, and you can call it a harsh environment. Harsh means very difficult and extreme. So obviously the temperatures are very harsh, the conditions are very harsh, and you can describe this environment as being a harsh environment. In this part of the world, you experience a polar night and the midnight sun, because in the North Pole, there's only one sunrise and only one sunset per year. Because of the position and the way the Earth rotates and its proximity to the sun, its position to the sun, half of the year is daytime and half of the year is nighttime. So 6 months of daylight and then 6 months of darkness. Imagine living in a permanently dark place for 6 months.
I don't know what would be worse, permanently dark or permanently light?
Permanently dark,
Yeah,
I think.
more depressing. But boy, would you get tired of light and never being dark after 6 months. That would be irritating too, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, if you had a good pair of sunglasses, you could you could get through it. But if it was permanently dark, you'd need torches all the time. It would be terrible. So there are many collocations that you could use if you're speaking about the poles. You could talk about extreme conditions or harsh conditions that we mentioned, vast stretches of ice covering the Earth, and a fragile ecosystem. What other collocations are there, Reza?
Melting ice caps. So a cap is something on top of another thing. For example, you can put a cap on your head, a baseball cap. It's a hat. It goes at the top. Melting ice caps are when the top bit of the ice, for example, it could be pack ice, or it could be an ice shelf, or it could be glacier. When the top bit starts to melt, you have melting ice caps.
Other collocations include climate patterns, because the climate changes in a particular pattern in these areas. The human impact, because we're doing research and probably soon drilling for more oil in these areas. So there's a huge, unfortunate human impact in these beautiful areas of natural wonder. Scientific research, we mentioned that in the South Pole there are people who are doing scientific research. And wildlife conservation, because we want to look after our polar bears and our seals and whales and everything that lives in naturally in these areas.
So those are our words which are directly linked to the North and South Pole and the conditions. But we've also got some idioms and expressions for you. I wonder if you remember, we said at the beginning of the podcast, to be poles apart. That meant to be at the opposite end of the spectrum, yeah, when things are very, very different. Craig, can you think of any other idioms or expressions?
Well, there are a couple with ice. You can be on thin ice. Obviously, if you're literally on thin ice, you have the danger of falling through into the icy cold water. But if you are idiomatically on thin ice, you're in a very risky situation. Imagine you're constantly late going to work and your boss is very tired of your tardiness, your lateness. Your boss might say to you, "Be careful, Reza, you're on thin ice. If you're late again, that could be the end of your employment." So if you're on thin ice, you're in a risky, dangerous situation.
If you break the ice, that could mean that you're starting a conversation. You're using an icebreaker. For example, you're beside someone in a bus stop. There's just the two of you. You feel you should say something and you say, "Hello, oh, it's very hot today, isn't it?" Just to get that person to say, "Oh, yes, yes." Just to be pleasant, to be nice. So you're breaking the ice or you're using an icebreaker.
Icebergs are very common in the poles and they tend to float on the sea. Some of them are immense, very, very big. But the idiom, the tip of the iceberg, means only a small part of a bigger issue or problem. Imagine there are one or two visible problems at work. Well, it might be a lot worse than people think. So you could say to your colleague, "Yeah, there are a couple of problems, but I fear it's just the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to have more problems later down the line. It's just the tip of the iceberg."
The next expression we've got for you is an unusual one, perhaps, for you. An ice maiden. So M-A-I-D-E-N, maiden, is quite an old-fashioned word, which means usually a young woman. In this particular expression, an ice maiden, it's specifically for a woman who is a beautiful woman, but she's very cold-hearted. Ice is cold. So if I say she's an ice maiden, yeah, she's beautiful, but she has a very, very frosty, very cold heart. So it's not a compliment. It's not a good thing if you call a woman an ice maiden.
I've known one or two of those in my past, Reza, ice maidens. A drop in the ocean, a drop of water. If you say that something is a drop in the ocean, it's a very small thing compared to what's needed. Imagine you go to a place in the world that suffers from widespread hunger. There are many people dying of hunger in this area. You might give somebody a few euros to help them buy food, but really that's just a drop in the ocean. It doesn't really help to solve the problem.
Now, if something's frozen, it's below zero, that means it can't move. It's stuck in that position, right? So the expression frozen in time means unchanged for a long period. It's nothing to do with the temperature. For example, you could say that there are tribes in the Amazon rainforest who are frozen in time. They haven't changed their customs, their culture in hundreds of years because
they're not cold, though.
They're not cold, they're warm. So it's nothing to do with the temperature, yeah? It simply means that nothing's changed for a long time. They're frozen in time.
You can give someone an icy look. If you look at someone in a very cold and unfriendly way, you can say you're giving someone an icy look. Yeah, I took his parking space quickly without him noticing, and he gave me an icy look. There are a couple of interesting facts about the poles. One is that Antarctica has 70% approximately of the world's fresh water. All the water in the world that you can possibly think of in lakes and reservoirs and other areas, well, 70% of fresh water is in Antarctica.
Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good to know that there's a lot of fresh water there, which we might need someday. But the bad news is, yeah, we are not as powerful as Mother Nature. What if that water melts in a way that we don't want it to? It means that if you live in a coastal town or city, the water could cover you. So that's a double-edged sword, the fact that there's a lot of water in the Antarctic.
How do you think melting ice caps could affect the rest of the world, Reza?
They'll flood us if you live on the coast.
Rising sea levels.
Yeah.
Coastal flooding, definitely.
If we can control how the ice melts, it could be to our advantage. But if we can't control it, we're buggered.
Another interesting fact about this part of the world is the fact that the magnetic poles and the geographic poles are not in the same place, because the ice drifts and moves over time. And in fact, the difference in distance between the magnetic north and the geographic north is as much as hundreds of kilometers. It's not in the same place.
Another interesting fact is that the North Pole has no time zone. So if you happen to be in the North Pole, which I admit is very unlikely, and someone says to you, have you got the time there, mate? You'll have to say, no, there is none. Because researchers who live there, they use whatever time zone they choose. Think about it. Think about how a globe, yeah? So think of not on paper, but actually a three-dimensional round representation. The true representation of Earth is the lines go vertically, right? But they all meet at the point in the north. So which line do you choose? Which time zone? Whichever one you want.
It'd be very convenient if you're late, couldn't it? You said you were going to be here at 3:30. Well, it's not 3:30. I don't know what time it is.
I thought you meant Azerbaijani time. You meant Greek.
And another interesting fact is that Antarctica is technically a desert because of the extremely low precipitation in the area. So, it's a desert, but not a desert.
Not a hot one.
Not a hot one. Not a desert with sand and camels. No.
Yeah. Having said that, if you go there, you still need your sun cream, because you get burnt in the North and the South Pole because there's nothing to protect you from the sun. So whenever it is sunny there, it's one of the places on Earth where you'll most get burnt. You do need your sun cream there.
And your sunglasses. So which pole do you think will be more difficult to survive in, Reza?
Oh, clearly the South, because it's colder.
And higher.
And higher
It's
too.
about 2,800 meters above sea level. So the altitude would also affect you because obviously it's windier and colder because it's higher.
Closer to the sun, so you're going to get even more sunburnt there as well. So it's the opposite to the Dead Sea in Israel, which is the lowest place on Earth, which is quite a bit below sea level, where people go to sunbathe and they don't get burnt because the sun's rays get filtered because it's so low down. But if you're very high up, think about it, you're closer to the sun, so you'll get burnt more easily.
Reza, would you consider joining a polar expedition and spending a few weeks or months in either of these places?
Well, certainly not before I finished my examiner standardization online and my corrections. I'm a bit busy right now, but at some time in the future when I retire, why not? I would consider it. And you?
Yes, I would. Maybe not months, but I think it would be a wonderful area to visit. I'd love to see the penguins. I'd love to see the polar bears. So I would go to either pole, I think, but maybe not for longer than a couple of weeks. Too cold for me.
I would only go if it was a very large group, by the way, because I just like the idea of safety in numbers, because I think it could all go wrong. But if there's a very large group, at least I won't be the first one to die. A few might die before me.
Well, if you're worried about being eaten by a polar bear, you only have to run faster than the slowest person in the group.
That's true.
But now it's your turn to practice your English. Would you like to go to the polls? And I don't mean to vote in an election. I mean to go to the North or South Pole. If you would, which one would you prefer? Or maybe you've already been to one of the poles. If you have, please tell us about it. We would love to hear about your experience. You can do that by sending a voice message. Go to speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast, or send us an email with a comment or question to me, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, or to Reza at Belfast, Reza, R-E-Z-A, at gmail.com. All of this information can be found in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/617.
And if you're a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English with free or paid resources, you could visit the Mansión Inglés website. It's at mansioningles.com. And for additional paid products, you could browse the online store, which you'll find at store.mansioningles.net.
And maybe you'd like a full transcription of this podcast so that you can read every word that we say, and you can get that by joining our Patreon program. So as a Patreon member, you'll get an invitation as well once a month to join me for an informal chat on Zoom for an hour or so, and you can practice your speaking. You'll also have that warm, happy feeling of supporting us and this podcast. For more information, go to patreon.com/Inglespodcast.
Craig, what have we got in next week's episode?
We're going back to grammar next week, Reza. We're going to be speaking about concessive clauses and inversion. What does all that mean? Well, expressions like strange as it may seem or try as he might. And many thanks to Carmen for giving us that idea as well. Until next time, thank you very much for listening to us this week. Have a lovely week ahead. It's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.